mind and body relation is obviously a central assumption in the new age sciences and new age therapy, especially in the last maybe 2 or 3 decades. But actually, the mind and body relation has been a fascination and a topic of exploration since the beginning of human philosophical written history. We will be looking briefly at the sort of various countries and where they have looked at this relationship. For example, ancient Greeks already spoke about it, and the relation between psyche and body was clearly established. Now, something happened here in the West around the 17th century is the Cartesian thought system, which split away the sort of the spiritual from the physical. They separated church from science. And this separation made it that the concept of mind was relegated to the concept of brain, the brain functions. And this has been a sort of a sore spot and a subject of discussion ever since. Now, what is the nature of the mind in reality? What we can say is that the mind is what actually enables us to have a subjective awareness of the environment. And in other words, to perceive the environment and to respond to it in a coherent and appropriate manner. So if we break down the mental activities, they are made of a set of faculties, which today we call these faculties either which are cognitive faculties, which includes obviously consciousness, it includes intelligence, the capacity to think, to analyze, to evaluate, to judge. Language, perception, and memory are a part of these cognitive functions. And there is the non-cognitive aspect of the mind, which includes the emotions and the instincts. Now, based on the sort of physicalist scientific approach, the mind is considered actually a product of the brain. And this, as I mentioned before, it will remains I would say, it continues to be a great metaphysical problem and debate between the scientist and sort of the physicalist scientist and the others. So basically, in this first discussion, we will be exploring what the Chinese have given us in the classical text concerning the structure of the psyche. And from there, of course, we will be trying to unravel what we consider the hidden roots of disease and the treatment for these, which we can adapt in our modern daily practice. So let's have a look at what is understood under the term of the psychosomatic relationship, psyche and soma. Psychosomatic medicine, modern psychosomatic medicine, actually is a discipline including psychology, neurology, and the effect of the psyche on the endocrine system and the immune system. And even there are these new specialties that we find in universities like psycho-endo-neuroimmunology or even psycho-endo chronobiology, which even brings in the matter of sort of cycles and rhythms and day and night cycles, etc. All these are modern specialties, which at the time I studied medicine, they did not exist. So this is, in a sense, we see that what we talk about psychosomatics includes many disciplines in the sort of the Western medicine. This has led to what is known as behavioral medicine. And behavioral medicine, which is actually leading to behavioral therapy. The concept here, we will be coming back to this in further lectures, is that the thoughts that we have will influence our feelings, which also influence our emotions, and therefore they will influence our behavior. And these thoughts and feelings, the root core structure of these are what we call our belief systems. That's why the whole process that we are going to develop is going to be to understand these belief systems and how they influence the way that we perceive the world and we react to it. This is a obvious sort of conclusion that two people do not react to the outside events, to the same outside event in the same way. So each person has their own individual reaction. And this is very important when we are working with patients. Now, just as an overview of in the historical landmarks, obviously the Chinese medical texts, the Neijing Suwen and the Lingshu, which are attributed obviously to the Yellow Emperor, the historians are not always clear at the period that these texts were actually appearing. The Yellow Emperor supposedly existed maybe 200 years prior to this period, to Buddha's period. But what is important in Chinese medical history is like around 500 BC, we have the period known as the 100 schools of thought, where a lot of philosophical ideas were being developed, and a lot of them have marked deeply Chinese medicine. Most important to have actually evolved at that time is the Confucian Confucian philosophy and the Taoist philosophy of which are actually contemporary. And interestingly, the same time we had the Buddhist philosophy developing in northern India. But of course, the Buddhist philosophy did not reach China for several centuries. But very interestingly, we find when you study the classics of Chinese medicine, you can clearly see the origin of the sort of principles and ideas were actually coming from this or that school of thought. The Buddhist, with Buddhist ideology, the human suffering is a consequence of his misconception. That means our belief system, the wrong belief system. So this was a very important addition to Chinese medicine, which later we see sort of explains how in the Sung dynasty, the three causative factors for disease were described. At the same time in China, at the same time in Greece, we have the Hippocrates, which is considered the father of medicine in the West. And he sort of postulated that diseases are consequences of lifestyle and habits. Now, this was very important because prior to that, of course, people believed that disease was a punishment by gods or spirits or whatever. So he brought it actually to a human level. The same thing happened in China. Also, the idea of demons or ancestors, sort of the spirits of ancestors making us sick, was replaced by the concept of winds, which obviously represents the climatic factors. Later, Galen also postulated that talked about human temperaments. And there was a lot of actually talk about the interrelation of physiology and psychology in Persian and Islamic medicines in the sort of between 8th and 14th century. And we finally come to this very important stage in Chinese medicine This is the Sung dynasty, where the three causes of disease were established and clearly delineated. We'll talk about this in a moment. In the 20th and 21st century, of course, I put 21st century because for me, one of the big contributions are by Candace Pert, who developed this concept of molecules of emotion, which actually clearly establishes the relation between the mind, the brain, and the body. This is, of course, the sort of the fathers of modern psychosomatic medicine. Now, to understand a little bit where we are going, we have to look at what is meant by psychology in Chinese medicine. First of all, in Chinese medicine, psychology involves what we call psycho-emotional energies, and this is represented by the notion of Shen. Shen we are going to explore in detail in later slides, but already we see that the concept of Shen, translated often in the Western languages into spirit, is very limiting. And that we'll see that Shen actually has many other meanings, and in a different context, it can have a totally different meaning. Now, psychology is not only understanding people, it's to understand life itself. And I think this is a very important point to underline at this stage. Now, what is life? The basic program in every living form is the perpetuation of life. This we have it in common with all life forms. And of course, in humans, it takes even a more elaborate form. But if you have noticed, animals, they have this program, plants have this program, and how they basically everything is geared to this perpetuation of life. And according to the Chinese understanding, any action or behavior that does not follow this rule is considered abnormal. This, in a way, is to define what we are going to consider as normal psychological behavior or abnormal. This will, the basic reference will be in relation to perpetuation of life. Now, I mentioned earlier that the Buddhist tradition brought to Chinese medicine certain concepts, and one of them was the notion of passion. Passion basically is considered in Chinese medicine as something which is pathological, unless the passion is the desire for life. That means that passion is rooted in life. That's the only passion which is life promoting. Otherwise, all the other passions will be destructive. And this we will be studying in further depth in the second module, which deals with all the emotions and their manifestations. Now, one of the statements which is very important also, which we find in the classical text, it says the natural order of life is the tranquility of the heart. Now, what is meant by this? Please always keep in mind that the heart in Chinese medicine is not the pump, the heart pump in Western medicine. It's unfortunate that we have the same terminology, which can be misleading. In Chinese medicine, the heart is the emperor, and the only primary function it has is to house the Shen. And the function of Shen is basically the faculties of the mind. So this is the main function, and the tranquility of the heart refers to the tranquility of the mind. And it is said that an empty heart will perceive all the input from outside and make choices which are correct choices. When the mind or the heart is not sort of disturbed by passions, which are consider to be desires, it can make the right choices. Otherwise, the mind is like a mirror which is flawed, it's stained, and it will reflect the outside in an inaccurate way, and therefore the decisions will be wrong. The responses will be inappropriate. This is a concept which is quite interesting, and of course, it will be one of the sort of base discussions in the following seminars, where we are going to explore what we call the belief